Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at functions in Archean with Xenon code. Now functions are one of the most useful pieces of code we have out there. If you want to go back to the very, very early days of programming, we had these things called subroutines, where basically you had your long stack of program and you could say, hey, if this thing happens, go down to this part of your program. But the cool thing is anybody could order the code to go back to that part of the program. And that was basically where the modern concept of a function came. What a function is a block of repeatable code that may or may not return a value. Let me show you what I mean. Let's go ahead and create a really, really simple code here. I'm going to go ahead and say a tick. And again, this will happen every single second. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a function call to make the word hey appear on the screen. So to do function calls, all you're going to do is you're going to do an @ symbol, and you're simply going to name the function. In this case, I'm going to say hey, and I'll do parentheses. Now, these parentheses are going to be very, very important for us a little later on when we start dealing with arguments, but we'll get there. Now, if I were to run this code, it would get very grumpy at me on account of the fact that we do not have the actual function defined. So to define the function, we're going to go somewhere up above where we're calling it, and simply type in function, @ and then the name of the function with parentheses. Now, what we're going to do with this function is we're going to make it simply print something on the screen. Keep it nice and simple. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to type in right, we'll do 0, 0, we'll do blue this time, and we'll do hey. Now, if I run this code, you will observe that hey appeared on the screen. Now you're sitting there going, oh, that's kind of cool. You can basically say hey anytime you want to. All you simply do say hey, and it tosses it up there in the upper right corner of the screen, or upper left corner of the screen, I should say. Now this block of code called say hey can be called as many times as we want. Now to demonstrate this concept to you, I'm actually going to go to the top number of heys. And we're going to go ahead and make this a number here. And we're going to go ahead and initialize it to a value of 1. Number of hey equals 0. Now, the reason I'm doing this is I want to demonstrate just how handy this darn thing is. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to drop this down to only happening every other second, or actually twice a second, I should say, just so things don't happen so quick we can't see them. So now what I'm going to do is go up to my say hey here. I'm going to go ahead and do a quick write. I'll go ahead and do the value of number of hey. Very, very technical technique here. Number of hey, that looks good to me. Let's see, do I need to change anything? Nope, but I do need to include a color. We'll do green. And now, of course, if I run my code, you'll see that it says hey, 0, because we've only said this thing once. And then what I'm going to do in this function is I'm simply going to add 1 to number of hey. So if I do number of hey plus equals 1, watch what happens when I run my code. We better make the background black first, though. Black. Watch this. You'll observe the fact that twice a second here, I should say, this number gets 1 bigger. And now the reason it's getting 1 bigger is because twice a second, I'm making the background black, then I'm calling this, which is causing these things to happen. Now, this is going to seem crazy, but I can call this say hey things as many times as I want. I can come in here and do that. That would actually cause this to go up twice. And now you can see we could barely see it because we're not blanking out the screen between drawings here. If we don't do that, of course, you can see everything kind of merges on top. Now this gets even crazier because we could do things like this now. You can see it's just a of text there. And the reason it looks like that is because I'm repeating twice a second 10 times. So I'm actually repeating 20 times a second here. So this is actually 210, 220, and so on and so forth. And you can see this piece of reusable code I can use over and over and over and over and over again. And that is just so darn useful. So let's go ahead and clean this out again real fast and hit save. What you probably observe is because we're no longer calling say hey, you'll observe the fact that nothing's happening anymore. It's not printing anything. This code is sitting there in memory ready to be used. Now that's okay. This is kind of a boring use for this. But what we can also do with values, or functions I should say, is we can return values back to the user. Let's say that for some reason I had some kind of constant I didn't want to store in a variable, which would be kind of silly. But again, for the purposes of demonstration, we'll go ahead and create a new function called number 5. And this function is going to do something a little different. It's going to send a number back. Instead of say hey, where it just kind of does something as many times as we activate it, it's going to return a value. So one of the things you have to do in Archean is you have to define the type of value it is going to be returning. In our case, since we're returning the number 5, I'm going to do : number. that means this function now has a value, whereas this guy up here doesn't have a value. So that also means that inside of the body of my function, I need to use a command called return. Return immediately goes back from where you came from. Remember, I was talking about the stack in the old days? This would send you back to wherever your call was originally made. Now, you'll notice here, it's expecting us to return a number. So I'm going to return 5. Now, if I run this code, nothing bad happens. As a matter of fact, nothing happens. It makes the background black twice a second here. So what if I wanted to use the value of this function? Let's do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write, actually make it simpler here. We're going to say var sum equals number 5 plus 10. Now you're sitting here going, man, that doesn't make sense. Why are you using this as a demonstration? Because it works great. You'll notice here, I take 5, I add 10 to it, and that becomes sum. Now, if I wanted to write sum onto the screen, you'll notice it gets grumpy at me because sum, unfortunately, is a number. If I turn it to text, you'll notice it's 15. And you're sitting here going, what? Check it out. Number 5 is a function that returns a number. The value that it's going to return is the number 5, which means for all intents and purposes, this number 5 function is actually a value of 5. Now, if we take 5 and add 10 to it, that's going to get us a value of 15, which we convert into text, so we can then write it on the screen. Now, you're sitting there going, this was a pretty goofy way to do this. So why'd you do that? The reason I did that is it's a great demonstration of returning values before things get complicated. Remember a minute ago, I was talking about the fact that you've got parentheses? Those parentheses give you the ability to not only return a value, but you can also send a value. This is known as an argument or a parameter, depending on the particular context that you're using it. Let's do that. Let's say I want to write a function that adds 5 and then returns the new number. Oh, you start to see where this gets important. Let's do it. So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to call this a function, add 5. And in the parentheses, I'm going to pass an argument. This argument is going to be a variable that we declare. We'll just do the number, and we'll order it to be a number. And of course, since we're returning a value, we're simply going to return a number. Yuck, explain what you just did. We're saying create a function called add5. Send an argument that is a variable called number, which for our convenience happens to be a number. Now, when you're done doing whatever magic you're going to do, send back a number. Man, that sounds a lot weirder than it really is. Let me demonstrate. So what we're going to do now is I'm simply going to say return number plus 5. Now you're sitting here saying, whoa, what did you do here? So what I did is I took a value from the user. We don't care what that value is as long as it's a number. We're going to give it back after adding 5 to it. So let's go ahead and clean all this business out real quickly here, and let's demonstrate. So I'll say var val equals add 5, and we'll do 100 this time, make it interesting. And of course, what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and print. Actually, we'll write. We'll be nice. Write text val. Now, what this will do is take the value of 100, put it into number, and then after putting it into number, add 5 to it, and then send it back, which means this function is now polymorphic, if you want the fancy word here, now has a new value of 105. If I run my code, you will observe that it does indeed have a value of 105 because this new function now becomes that value. Now, the reason this is so darn useful is I can do stuff like this now. Add 105, and then if I were to write it again, there's your polymorphism in action. We'll go ahead and press paste. Boop. Yeah, of course, you can't see that one because that one's getting overwritten. There you go. You'll notice I can use this function as many times as I want and constantly return those values over and over and over again. Now you're sitting here going, hey, that's actually darn cool. I like that. I like what you can do with that. That is really, 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 really flexible. I agree with you completely. Now, a while ago, if you poke around on that lovely workshop, you probably saw this thing kicking around. This is my simulation of Chiva 4, which is an old school navigational system. Now, one of the things I do is I use functions all the time. Now, if I open up my actual code itself, you can see I've got quite a few variables there, and you can see I leave myself some notes. But what you'll observe here is I have functions that handle anything that I need to do a lot, such as arctangent, calculating distance, calculating heading, calculating error, time, track, resetting things, updating components, handling every single function of my actual program, one function at a time. Now, the reason I do it this way is to keep everything nice and clean, keep everything out of the main units. And this makes it much, much, much safer to actually do some processing. Now, the crazy thing is this goes even further. You'll notice when I climb into my command module that there's an enormous amount of stuff going on. And the only way it would have been possible to basically work our way through all of the different components, this all works, by the way, is in order to break them into those individual functions. Now, the crazy thing here is with this particular project, that could be fun too, you'll actually see that not only did I break things into individual functions in order to make it simpler, I broke it into individual programs for the purposes of keeping the code separate from itself to make it simpler for the purposes of actually going through and building the programs inside of this. Now, this was a very long project for me to basically go ahead and create. And the reason it was so manageable is everything was kept separate from itself to make it quick and easy to use. So when you're writing code and you're designing these functions, anytime you can use a function makes your life easier. One of the things that I actually see quite a bit, which I highly recommend, and again, this is more of a style than a how-to, is when you have an init, always go ahead and create functions for each major thing. So for example, if I have update values, I could do something like get inputs, update values, print screens. Now this means this wouldn't be init, this would be tick. This means that all of these functions would be, again, I've not created these, I'm just showing you how I would do it, are now nice and clean and out of that tick, making things much, much, much easier to manage and modify. I can't say this enough. You want to use these functions whenever you get the opportunity to keep things separate and keep things reusable and flexible. Enjoy.